Beautiful, man.
Oh, man.
There's a hit single, if ever there was one. Hey, guys. Anyway, thank you very much again for tuning in to another episode of Andertons TV. And my very special guest today is Jakko, and here I go. Jakovic?
No.
No. Jakko, Jack of all trade?
Yeah, well, it's a bit of that.
We might do this bit again when I can get your name pronounced.
No, it's all right. No, let's. I pronounce it Jakczyk, but it's convoluted, the explanation, because my adoptive father came to England at the end of the war, and they spelt his name incorrectly on all the documents. And he thought, you know what, it's just going to be easier to learn how to spell it wrong. So that's what we've ended up with. It's just me and my son and my daughter. No one else has got that name in the world.
I like it. Well, look, we met. Obviously, I saw some pictures of you and heard about you in a PRS press release when the guitar with the big scary face, the King Crimson kind of face on it, was released. And then we met fortuitously at a PRS event recently, had a bit of lunch together, and you regaled us with so many stories of just...
Well, don't build this up, because I'll only be a disappointment.
Your colourful life.
Yeah.
With lots of cool bands and lots of great stories and stuff. So we thought, you should come on, and then we, share the stories. So look, everybody say hello to Jakko. And tell us, let's start with the now, and then we'll go back to the beginning. I mean, how did the King Crimson thing?
It's not just my surname you've got a problem with pronouncing.
I just can't speak generally, I know.
Kim John Il Crimson, yeah.
There's a tribute band.
Yeah.
There was one.
Yeah, it's not a problem getting the musicians. It's convincing them to have that haircut. What did you ask? Oh yeah, no. When I first got the call to join Crimson, I'd been playing a PRS, standard PRS, and they were very into the idea of doing something special for me. So they did a kind of custom job, really beautiful. And I thought, well, it'd be great to have the artwork, and I should have brought it with me. But so mine's it's a carved maple top, and they did these beautiful kind of iridescent markers in the neck, which look lovely. And then on the reverse, there's another detail from the inside of the original album artwork on the back that nobody sees because it's up against my guts most of the time. And we do this thing with Crimson. We sell these tickets where you get to interact with the manager, and we do a bit of a Q&A. And so after a while, quite a lot of people said, will a version of that guitar ever become available? And Paul and everybody seemed kind of into it. So we did a kind of, it's an SE, so it's a budget version of the one that I've got.
Yep.
Mine's got a piezo in the bridge, so I use a kind of two output thing. But this has got a coil tap instead, and yeah.
They don't look like the same pickups you get on the normal one.
No, well, it's funny you should mention it.
Is it?
These are the kind of classic PRS pickups that I've got on this model.
Right.
But the difference is pretty minimal.
I don't know whether you had any expectations with regards to sales or stuff like that, but when that was launched at the NAMM show, along with two other new PRS SE models, one being an SE version of Paul's guitar, Paul Reed Smith's own guitar, and I can't even remember what the other one was, but another one. I'll be honest with you, I think the general sentiment was, that'll be the tough sell, out of the three.
That's right, and yet it doesn't.
It's the biggest selling one.
The biggest selling one.
It's been the biggest.
I tell you what
one.
is funny. My son, who's here, we were out a couple of months ago. We went to a guitar shop that should remain nameless, because normally
there are other guitar shops. There.
And Django was playing a guitar, and it was kind of an empty day. So there was most of the staff were behind the counter, and they were looking at a computer monitor, and I could hear them go, "Oh man, that's fantastic." And one of them went, "No, it's not. That's hideous. Why would anyone want to buy that?" And I said, What are you looking at? And I said, "Oh, it's this new PRS guitar they're putting out with this." And one of the blokes said, "Yeah, that's the Chris." And I said, "That's my guitar." He went, "What?" I said, "That's my guitar." "Yeah, all right, mate." Like I was some nutter. But right there you saw that kind of the Marmite nature of the image,
Well, that's great to sort of set the scene as to sort of why you're here, but that was only, as I said, that was a fortuitous meeting. I think it's, I've been looking forward to doing this anyway, just because once you sort of scratch the surface and you look at your career, it's you play with some crazy artists and done some crazy cool stuff in your own right as well. But let's go back then to so you parents of Polish descent, both of them.
I was adopted as a baby, and I had my adoptive parents. My mother was French and my father was Polish.
Right.
Much later in my early 20s, I found who my real mother was, and it turned out she was quite a famous singer in Ireland in the 40s and 50s. She fronted one of the big Irish show bands out there. Yeah, that was really weird to find that out.
But you were brought up in the UK, or
yeah,
did you
I
start in
was born. I was born in London.
Right.
I was born in Highgate, in fact, and then brought up kind of in Watford and that kind of neck of the woods,
With mum and dad listening to perhaps more traditional.
Well, my mum used to listen to Edith Piaf and Georges Brassens.
My grandparent, my grandmother she's dead now, so I don't know if that puts her in the past tense or not, but she's French. So yes, Edith Piaf. Yeah. Sunday mornings with wailing. I can't remember what, I can hear the voice, but it's just, I can hear that on Sunday mornings.
Yeah, so there was a bit of that. My father's tastes were kind of eclectic, I think. They were, I remember there was some Richard Strauss, there was some Ukrainian folk music, and rather oddly Jim Reeves, who I kind of never liked as a result.
As you say, eclectic, definitely. And then, so how were you, none of those, unless you're talking sort of like a folky thing. So what was it about the music that was playing in the house that you can remember going, oh, I fancy having a strum?
My father had originally played in a kind of Ukrainian folk group. So he had a guitar in the house, which he never played because he was a carpenter and he had an accident with a planing machine and lost most of that finger, so he couldn't really play, so it was always hanging around, so I would pick it up, and so I guess I wasn't taking it seriously at the time, but I mucked around with it sufficiently to kind of get some calluses going, so that when I did start to take it seriously, it wasn't as painful as it might have been had you know what I mean, from scratch.
And what sort of age are we talking now?
I guess I think I started to really take it seriously from the age of 10 and 11, and I had a next door neighbour who was maybe 2-3 years older than me, which when you're that age is a kind of significant thing, and he was listening to the music of the late 60s at the time, and he introduced me to loads of stuff that I probably would never have heard, and I liked a lot of it. I remember, I guess one of the first guitar heroes would have been a guy called Terry Kath, who was the guitarist in Chicago.
Oh, okay.
25 or 6 to 4, so fantastic lead breaks and stuff in it. And then one day he had a sampler, and I mean that in the traditional sense, in that it was a vinyl LP that had a number of tracks by different bands on that label.
Right.
And it was an island sampler, and he said, "You've got to listen to this." And he played me 21st Century Schizoid Man by King Crimson. It blew the top of my tiny little head off completely. And even at that age, I was aware that this was coming from a different place. I mean, retrospectively, you know, there's a whole kind of blues into progressive thing, and this was coming from somewhere else, and I thought, man, this is incredible.
So, I mean, that's bizarre full circle, and that it should still stand out as a moment.
Absolutely insane. Yeah, no, it did. And then I remember going out and trying to buy an album with my pocket money, and so that would have been a year or so later. So I guess I'd have been 11 or 12, and I bought the second album because I couldn't find the first album. And that, it was full of kind of grandeur and mystery, and it was amazing. And then they played at Watford Town Hall about a year later, and I went, and I did leave that thinking somehow my DNA had been changed, and somehow, and for years after, I look back at that as a rather kind of romantic teenage notion.
I think that's great.
However,
But then, so you're mid-teens now. You've had your mind blown by the band. This very progressive band. How do you then? Do you try and teach yourself that, or do you find a tutor that can steer you on that path?
Oh well, it's hard to recall those the heady pre-internet days. Where you really had to had to search those things out. No, I didn't. I mean, not complete naivety. The kind of music that I liked and was attracted to. I think at that age, you're still you're responding to it on a kind of gut level. It's only retrospectively that you think, actually, this music's really complicated. I didn't know that, and I didn't know that was a thing. So there was Crimson, there was Genesis, there was a band called Henry Cow, and bloody hell, I've covered one of their pieces, and that's really complicated stuff. So I guess I developed this kind of affectation, I was kind of imitating the sounds and imitating the ideas without completely understanding what was going on.
Yeah. I can't imagine, just knowing the normal path of like, hello, I'm a guitar tutor, what would you like to learn? And you go, could you show me some King Crimson? It's like, no.
Yeah, so I never did that. And I ended up without that, I'm often envious of guys who will pick up a guitar at a party and they've got this kind of enormous repertoire of well-known hits. And I never did that. I went straight into writing my own weird stuff. And
so were you able to put a band together of sort of like-minded people and sort of
I had a band at school briefly, and then when I left school I met this like-minded guitarist who was older than me and tutored. I mean, he really knew he knew what he was doing, but we had similar tastes, Crimson and John McLaughlin and stuff, and we put this band together. So we had a 5-piece band. I was 15, 16 and we did one gig, and then we entered in this thing called this is the 70s equivalent of the X Factor. It was Melody Maker, which was you remember Melody Maker?
Absolutely,
a weekly music magazine, and they had this competition every year, the Melody Maker National Rock Folk Competition.
Okay.
So we entered that, and the rest of the band left because I was such an arrogant pain in the arse. And by the time our heat came through the post, there was only 2 of us left, and I just left school, and I was doing a kind of part-time job in a record shop, and a relief manager turned up. He was he's only about a year older than me, but he played the trumpet.
Right.
So I encouraged him down to rehearsal. So we rehearsed this kind of 10-minute set of weird compositions of a lineup of 2 screaming lead guitars and a trumpet.
That's the best.
What could possibly go wrong?
Please tell me you had the name to go with it as well. The best prog band name ever.
We were called Soon After, which is it's slightly pretentious.
But not massively. What is the most pretentiously named band you've ever been in? Actually, you probably can't say that on camera, can you?
Pretentious? No, I don't think I've been in any pretentious named bands. I'm trying to think. My favourite band name at the time was a band called 25 Views of Worthing.
Brilliant.
It was a great name.
Which, if you've ever been to Worthing, there probably are only 24 nice views of Worthing, so that would be the gag. But
anyway, listen, we turned up to this heat, and all the other local bands were there, the semi-pro guys, and they're all doing covers of Long Train Running, and they're incredibly kind of competent. We go on and play this weird stuff, which they hate, and we win.
Yes.
And then we won the next round, and then we went to the semi-final, which was at Imperial College behind the Albert Hall, by which time I'm unbearable. I'm wearing cheesecloth shirts and white loom pants and clogs, and I'm smoking these long cigarettes called Moore, which are disgusting, but I think they look cool. It's pathetic. We won that too, and we ended up at the final at the Roundhouse and came 3rd.
Did you cut anything with this band, or is there
No,
any
but we
memory?
got not written. There's no recorded stuff, but we toured. You know, we supported a lot of those bands at the time.
With that lineup, though?
Well, yeah.
Well, you didn't bother getting a drummer or
No,
anything?
I played bass pedals.
Brilliant.
There was no drummer. Yeah,
That's
it's
the
weird.
next thing. Royal Blood and all that. I think it's all passé now. I think it needs one trumpet and two guitar players. It's the new thing.
We did. Funnily enough, we went to with two pals, Nick Beggs and Dave Kilminster. We went to see Camel a few weeks back, and
they're still going.
yeah, and Andy Latimer had the most fantastic sound, and he's
They're local, aren't they? I'm sure Camel.
Yes, I think they are. I think they're from Guildford. Absolutely.
Like from Guildford.
Yes, I think you're right.
I just remember seeing.
I think you're right. Yeah.
Like old posters of music. I mean, even before I think I was even born, and Camel comes off as thing in there.
Well, the thing was after the gig, and we went backstage and we
Were
met.
they brothers? Andy and something Latimer in Camel.
No.
I'm thinking of someone else. Anyway.
After the gig, we went back to chat to Andy, and he seemed to know who I was. And I said, well, actually, Andy, the first professional gig I ever did was supporting Camel.
Amazing.
On the Snoo Goose tour with this ridiculous three-piece band. So that's where I started, anyway.
Now, feel free to sort of fill in the timeline, but at some point between this real proggy kind of fire of like that's where I want to do.
Yeah.
Things got a bit more poppy, didn't they? And sort of is that just bands that you started working with?
Do you mean what I was playing?
Yeah. Yeah.
I was in another band that did reasonably well. We never secured a deal, but we were doing pretty high profile gigs. And we were the wrong band at the wrong time because there was a bunch of guys that were in that had all been at music college apart from me, and it was right in the punk era. And I remember we were headlining the University College Union once, and one of these newfangled punk groups that we'd read about was supporting us. And I remember being on stage, and I just had an amp back then. I didn't use anything else, and I was blown away. I suddenly became aware of somebody standing too close, and I turned around. There's a guy with a cliched spiky. Really scary, and he was really trying to intimidate me, and he was talking to his mate but not looking at him. He was looking straight at me, and he said, "Here, Kev, get this geezer." And his mate said, "What about him?" He said, "He can play the guitar really well. What a wanker." And at that moment, everything I'd ever worked for or believed all kind of crumbled, and I thought, oh my God, so suddenly we were into this whole new era, and I guess what happened was I suddenly thought, well, one of the things about punk that I kind of liked was there were some bands that you'd hear these records with weird chords in.
Right.
And it wasn't born out of knowledge, or it was born out of two blokes going, well, if I play this, and then you'd get this really good, you think, wow, that's amazing. And I thought, well, actually, I can take this musicality thing and maybe, do shorter, more concise things, but that are interesting harmonically. And then I got I'm trying to work out what the order of stuff, but I ended up I made 3 solo albums, none of which came out.
Oh, so you obviously did you ever end up working 9 to 5 or something whilst trying to do this, or had you? So you've managed to just go straight
I've never
in.
done a proper job. Well, apart from when I first left school, and I did that stint in the record shop, and I did a summer of kind of, I was on a kind of manual labour agency where you went to a mad job every day,
I mean, this is back in a time where you must have had a label then or something, because you couldn't.
I went from that band that I was touring with. We earned enough to just about survive.
This is the soon after.
No, this is a band called 64 Spoons.
See, there are some good names in there. It's a good name.
And then from then, I gave a cassette to Dave Stewart, the keyboard player, who had been in Hatfield in the North and National Health, and when I met him, he was in Bruford with Alan Holdsworth and Jeff Berlin, and I'd given him a tape, foolishly thinking that was our road to success, and he and Bill came to a few gigs, and then I remember rehearsing with him and Bill in Clerkenwell. They had a rehearsal facility there with a view to maybe doing something, and that felt like this kind of big break. And then then Crimson reformed, ironically, and Bill went to join that, and I did the vocals on a single Dave Stewart made, and then he took my vocal off and put Colin Bluntstone's on, and it became a hit. But I did all the promotional stuff, and then he formed this band, and we toured on the back of the single, playing this weird music that nobody wanted because they came because of the hit single, which we did in the middle of all the weird stuff. And from then, that's when I got my first record deal, and I got an advance, absolutely. And then they went down the dumper, and the album didn't come out. So then I signed to Stiff Records, and got a healthy advance, so I could live off that. And then they went down the dumper, and the album didn't come out. You see a pattern developing here. And then I signed to a label called MDM that were part of Virgin, I made an album, and that didn't come out either.
Brilliant.
And in the meantime, I ended up playing on lots of other records.
Yeah, so you obviously, this is, I guess, where, you know, your name is associated with lots of cool artists. So whereabouts are we now, sort of chronologically? We're sort of...
I guess we're kind of we're between the early 80s into the mid 80s, yeah.
And so what were the... I mean, again, we must touch upon the other hilarious thing that's happening at this time. So you're obviously forging a career as a guitar player, playing with some cool bands, and we'll talk about that. And you do a little acting stint as well, sort of.
Well, kind of, yeah. Not overly keen on talking that. I did when I was still at school. I was in the National Youth Theatre.
Yeah.
And when I first left school, I did work. I got my equity card, and I worked for a touring company.
Yeah.
And I provided music as well as bits of acting.
Yeah.
So I did do little bits of that. I guess that was the other thing that kept me going. When you said, did I do a 9-to-5 job? No, I didn't, but I did voiceovers for a while as well.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
So musically then, what was the, round about that time, what was sort of paying the bills, and tell us about, was the that there obviously was the break came at, well, break's probably the wrong word, but just the opportunity to join Level 42.
Oh yeah, that was much later.
Much later. Okay, well let's fill in the blanks then.
Well, I guess I was doing a combination. I think when the last solo record, the third solo record, didn't come out, and in between all that, singles would come out, and you would see, I don't know what the equivalent is now, because obviously technology has changed the business entirely. But back then, Radio 1 kind of made or broke bands, and they would have a playlist meeting on a Tuesday. So you'd have this long build-up, of a band forming, a band getting a reputation, a band getting an audience, a band getting record company interest. Eventually they'd sign, and then they'd choose a producer, and they do it, and it all leads up to this single coming out, which is then that they go, nah, and then it's all kind of over. It's really weird. So I'd been through that, and then when the last album didn't come out, I thought, well, sod it, I'm just going to do stuff because I enjoy doing it. And I had an amazing year. I think it was 87. There was a girl that sang on a live thing that we did, my solo thing, and she'd signed a solo deal with A&M, and so I ended up playing on her record and doing some of the arrangements. And her name was Sam Brown. Mm-hmm.
Is that other man Brown's...
Joe Brown's daughter.
Joe Brown's daughter, yes. So she was big, wasn't she?
She was, but but this is a classic story.
Yeah.
This is a case in point. The first single came out, and it went to Radio 2. It's a Radio 1 rather. This isn't a Radio 1 record, so they didn't play it. So then she cobbled together a kind of cover, I think, and that didn't work. And then and I remember seeing the album that we'd made in the bargain bins in Our Price Records and thinking, God, what a waste,
Didn't she backing vocal with Floyd?
Yeah, she did. That's her, yeah.
I'm a massive Pink Floyd fan, and just particularly from
Pulse, that tour.
Was it that tour?
Yeah, she did earlier tours with them.
Yeah, I thought because anyway. But yes, I remember the name.
My point is that kind of 6 or so months later, that the single that they turned down had become a hit in like a top 5 hit in lots of other countries, and they went back to Radio 1 and said, "This has been is it? Oh, okay." And they put it on the playlist. And I've now got a disc on my wall.
Cool.
Because the song was called Stop.
Yeah, I really remember, because Joe Brown was one of those, you'd always see him on TV, and he had a funny haircut, and he played a bit of like ukulele or whatever he used to play like that. And then his daughter, yeah, she was cool. She looked great, didn't she? And
Yeah,
she had
she
a
was
good
great.
voice,
Fantastic
and it was a
Absolutely
great
brilliant.
tune. I'll have to go and look it up
Yeah.
afterwards. But yeah, it was. I remember that.
But you know, that's one of those moments that it turns on a decision.
And so you wrote that tune?
No, I didn't write
Or-
that. No,
right.
no. I played
You
on it, and I did some arrangements on the album.
Right.
I did BVs and
Yeah.
lots of bits and pieces on
Yeah.
that.
I don't remember. Did she? I don't know. Whatever happened to her sort of career? Has she sort of done well out of that sort of?
She did for a while, and she toured with Jules Holland, but her voice, there's something wrong with her voice. She can't sing
shame.
anymore. I know, it's tragic because she was brilliant, truly brilliant.
Oh well. Okay, so you're now being played on Radio 1, which is hurrah.
Yeah, and then I ended up doing loads of sessions, but I wasn't a session player.
Right.
You know what I mean
Is
by
that
that? I
because
wasn't.
you're not? Do you read and? You,
No,
or-
I don't read very
right.
well at all. So I wasn't that kind of guy.
No.
What I ended up being was I'd work with quite often. There'd be producers that I work with for me.
Yeah.
And they'd say, "Oh, yeah, do you
Yeah, well,
fancy
you-
playing on this, or do you fancy arranging this?" And so I ended up, playing on loads of different things. And I wrote a load of stuff on an album that was successful almost by accident too. So.
Which one was that?
We don't need to go into details, do we?
No,
it was
by all means not.
Well, he's dead now, bless him. But it was a singer. I use that word in the loosest possible term. Called Jermaine Stewart,
Yes.
who had a big hit with "We Don't Have to Take Our Clothes Off."
Yes.
And I did a load of stuff on the first album, and then co-wrote half of the second record.
Fair enough.
And then I remember, partly on the back of writing stuff that was successful, publishing companies used to, a bit like people that make films, they like the idea of, well, he was in a successful movie and he wrote a successful movie and he directed, so let's put the three of them together. This idea that,
Yeah.
So they like to then try and put you together with other guys who've been successful as composers or writers, And I got a list, and I thought, because I'm not a career writer. I write because it's what I feel or whatever. And there were two people on the list that I chose. One was Tom Robinson, who I'd always rather liked, and I always thought there was some musicality there. And I know he'd done some co-writing with Pete Gabriel, and so I met him, and we did loads of stuff. We did the theme tune and the incidental music to a series on Central. Called Hard Cases, and then I toured with him both in a band and as a duo, and then we made an album which I co-wrote and I produced and co-wrote for him, and that was great. I started doing stuff that I enjoyed. I was in I briefly joined this kind of avant-garde rock group in New York called The Lodge,
Right.
which featured the bass player John Greaves, who'd been in Henry Cow. And a lyrical genius called Peter Blegvad, who'd been in a band called Slap Happy.
Okay.
And the drummer was a guy called Anton Fier, who had a band called the Golden Palominos. This is all kind of a New York-based thing.
Yeah.
And that was great. And then that was Sam's album I did at the same time. And I also put together this, I had this kind of acoustic Anglo-Asian band called Dysrhythmia.
Right.
With Gavin, who's now the
Yes.
drummer in Crimson, an Indian percussionist called Pandit Dinesh, and this legendary double bass player called Danny Thompson.
This is super.
Well, it was weird,
Yeah.
having spent all that time kind of on the edge of, near success, and trying to find a way of kind of fitting this kind of, this kind of sense of music in a kind of pop format and failing miserably. Suddenly I thought, sod it. And I ended up doing loads of really interesting...
How does that scene even work? Because I'm sort of thinking, so we're pre-internet, airplay dominated by commercial radio stations that are never going to play any of this sort of stuff. How do you... Is it like a real sense of an underground live scene where everybody just knows who the cool cats are to go and watch?
Yeah,
and
I think all of those people had their own audience, and that they're not enormous. It's not an enormous audience, but it's still an audience. And I guess worldwide, it becomes a tangible thing. And the Dysrhythmia thing, for instance, we'd done a track on my solo record, which was this acoustic ballad I'd written on piano. And Danny Thompson's a childhood hero. The double bass on Solid Air by John Martin, and he was beyond a bass player. He had his own sound. And when you're with a label, you can phone them up and say, you couldn't track this guy down, could you? And they gave me his phone number, and it turned out he lived about 4 miles away from it. I had no idea. And then I'd been making this album in New York with this other band, and the label in England. I said, look, I've got this idea, and they said, oh, that sounds good. And they give you a budget, and it sounds mad now, doesn't it? But
yes.
That's what happened.
Yes, it wouldn't happen now, would it? Or at least, well, I don't know. I guess it would if you were the right.
Yeah.
Yeah, if they.
And then, so going up to the level 42 thing, the Tom Robinson album came out. It had really, really good reviews, great reviews. So it had a bit of profile there. But it was on a little label, and I remember the PR guy phoning me and saying, I've got you a TV show. And it was this, we talked about it earlier, didn't we? This TV show called the James Whale Radio Show. And I said, I'm not doing that. It's an after pub car crash.
Yeah, what was it? It was almost a bit like
The Word,
but like
a low budget version, right?
Yeah, I don't know if I'd say low budget, but shock jock version of The Word, wasn't it? Just how like offensive can we be politically, sort of thing.
And I said to him, I'm not doing it.
Yeah.
And then Tom had to phone me up and persuade me, and I resentfully packed my gear up and drove to Leeds, this poxy little studio, and we did this number, which I'd co-written with him, and I sang and I played a solo in the middle, and then I drove home full of resentment. And then a few months later, the phone rang, and it was Mark King, and offering me the job in level 42, not even an audition. And it was a bit later where I said, what? Everybody wanted that job. How did you? Yeah. And he said, well, Mike had seen you play at a Danny Thompson tribute thing, and Julian Mendelssohn had recommended me because he'd been the engineer on a number of things I played on, and I'd also co-produced Running in the Family, I think. And Nick Kershaw, who I've known since we were youngsters, had recommended me to Mark, and he came in from the pub late one evening, turned the telly on, oh, that's that bloke. And that's how I got the job, which, as I was saying to you before, it's luck,
Well, yeah, I mean...
But, those moments, yes. I was desperate to turn that down, but I didn't. And I wouldn't have got the job if I hadn't have done it.
And so, tell us what it's like stepping into that gig where you've got two of the most phenomenal guitar players had gone before you. And they're huge at this moment.
Well, yeah, he said, I'll send you some recent live board tapes for you to learn the set. And it's bleeding Alan Holdsworth. The solos are just incredible. It's incredibly intimidating. But here's the thing, I should tell you. That moment when I'd just left school and I was working in the record shop, I'd read an interview with Robert Fripp, who said the only guitarist worth listening to in this country is Alan Holdsworth. And I'd never heard of it.
Yeah.
So I went to the Rainbow and saw him play with Soft Machine, and it blew my mind. I'd never seen anybody play like that. And I was working in this record shop, and an album came in. It was Gong. So Alan had joined a version of Gong.
Yeah.
And I phoned the label up, and I pretended to be an old friend of his from Bradford. It's pathetic, really. I said, no, mate of mine's playing in band. You couldn't give us his phone number, could you? And they went, yeah, all right. And they gave me his phone number. So I phoned Alan Holdsworth up.
Amazing.
So embarrassed, and I said, oh, look, do you give lessons? And he went, no, man, no, I don't know what I'm doing. I can't give lessons. And then, much to my utter amazement, he said, you can come round if you like. And so, for a period, in my head, I don't know what the truth is now. Yeah. In my head, it was ages, but it may have been a handful. But in my head, I used to go round to his flat every Thursday for a number of weeks. And we would play together. He would tell me about because he was really hands-on. He used to get the soldering iron out, and he'd show me these stuff, and he'd play me records. Can you hear the compression on that? And it's amazing. So full circle to being offered the job.
Whereabouts was that with Alan? Because I've got this weird recollection of me in my short trousers working in Andertons, when I'm 15 years old, and it's mid-80s.
I think he did live in... Well, I tell you where I used to go and see him was Chessington. That's not far, is it?
So I've got this thing that he was mates with a chap called Guy Mason, who was our guitar salesman at the time, and I got this this odd recollection of really not knowing musically anything about him, but that he was a big deal.
Yeah.
And him just being so dour.
Yeah.
Just like, like unbelievably miserable when, and I don't know, I don't know that I never heard him play in the store or anything like that, and I'm not even sure if like one of those figments, I'm not sure what I'm remembering here other than something.
But no, every solo he ever played, every show he ever played was the worst show he ever played. I mean, there was a kind of one-downmanship thing going on. And of course I end up with this job. And I didn't know at the time, but Mark King told me this much later. He said, Al's brilliant, but he doesn't really work for level. He said he insisted on being at the back instead of down the front, so the horns were down the front. He wouldn't play rhythm. He wouldn't play open strings either. So when there's like a kind of funk thing going on, Alan's playing these mad inversions, And Mark said, he's a genius, but it wasn't really right for level 42. So. Yeah. But he said when he phoned him up to tell him, he was really put out. He said, really? I thought that was my gig. And so, because I kind of knew him, the next time I saw him was at the Jazz Cafe, and he'd always been very sweet to me. And I saw him, and he went, how's your gig going? I thought, oh no. And he said to me, he said, I know why they didn't want me to do that gig. It's because I look like Methuselah, is what he said. And I saw him a couple of years before he died. We were playing in King Crimson were playing at this theatre in Times Square. We did 4 or 5 nights, and the last night coincided with him playing at the Iridium, which is a jazz club on Broadway. Right. And we went up, and I've got these great pictures actually that Tony Levin took of me and him. He was so sweet, and he gave me a big cuddle, and he was saying to everyone, he's great guitar player. And I had to intervene and say, compared to Alan, I'm like a beginner with no strings on my guitar. So
it's crazy that Alan Holdsworth.
He was a man with his finger firmly on the self-destruct button.
Yeah,
I mean, ironically, part of what made him so extraordinary was the thing that kind of destroyed him. That obsessive kind of, and always wanting to get better, and always kind of, it never being quite right, and.
Yeah, and difficult to get into that level of music, isn't it? It's not for the faint-hearted.
No, when he was left to his own devices, I found it. I mean, that night that we saw him play, it was so intense, and there's like a chord change every beat, and I found it. The earlier stuff where he's playing with other people, and it's glorious. But
so tell us about then. Level 42.
Yeah.
I mean, what year are we at now?
This is 91, I think.
So still, presumably, the height of their powers, or certainly had 1 or 2 massive albums under their belt by then, didn't they?
Yeah.
So was that you're now, is this the first time they're going like, right, there's 50,000 people in the audience, or had you had a taste of that?
No, not really. No, they were much bigger crowds. In fact, the first I remember, we'd gone off and we'd done a lot of promotion, which is anyone watching this who's never done this is the most tedious thing, right. Where you fly around to different countries to mime, and you spend hours in incredibly uncomfortable. Backstage.
That was the thing then, wasn't it? Just,
that's how you promoted
everything was mime, wasn't it?
It was so dull.
What's your best story of like mucking around in a mime situation?
There's a couple that were weird. There was one, we did a TV show in Florence.
Right.
And it was there was a storm, and it was torrential rain, and this was outside in a kind of small amphitheatre.
You do in Florence.
Yeah, and I remember being on stage and Mark tapping his foot and water going everywhere. And they're all going, no, it's fine, no, it's not remotely dangerous. And then afterwards I found out that 2 of the lighting blokes had been taken to hospital because they got electrocuted. What else do I remember? Oh, there was a weird thing where Mark and Mike were doing kind of interviews, and Gary Husband, the drummer, and myself would be brought out to do some these promotional TVs and then come back. And I remember one Saturday afternoon it was, and I was waiting for the cab to pick me up Saturday morning to fly us to Paris. And I think either the cab had been late or Gary was late, but we missed our flight. And so we knew we weren't going to get the flight. So eventually the cab turned up, drove us straight to the airport. We had no baggage, so we went straight on the plane. We got off the plane. They drove us straight to the TV studio where Mark and Mike were already waiting.
Yeah.
And in fact, they had two of the crew standing where we were meant to be. We went on. We did the number once. We got in the cab, went back to the airport, and I was back home in England in time to watch the football results on the telly. That was really surreal.
So, how long did the Level 42 thing, and you know, were you in? I'm trying to think now of any of the videos that would have gone with the songs. Did you do all that kind of stuff?
We did. Guaranteed, and there was a song called Overtime, where we're supposedly that had a story and a narrative. So we were working in some kind of engineering factory, and we're pretending to use bits of equipment, and there's a whole scenario going on. That was great fun, actually. A few My Father's Shoes and a few other Guaranteed, and
again, that was a I don't know, they were one of those bands. I think I always remember being at school, and I think it was, although I suppose by that time I'd left school, but I remember because I worked in a music store, and there was like all the guys in the music store they'd know who all the good bands were, good in, you know, the ones with the good musicians in it. So they were the ones, and I do remember at school, you know, having to lead this like double life between telling people at school what I thought all the cool music was just to fit in, and then sort of having this
with your elder sort of, peers,
quite mature record collection at home of sort of all the good musicians.
Well, the reason I even got into that, telling you about that, was that we did all the miming promotion thing. And we came back, and we did a couple of festivals in the summer, and they were, you know, because it's a festival, we play a shorter set, and it's all over in a blur. You know, there's no sound check. You wander on, and it's, you know, so. And some of those gigs were big. We did we were second on the bill to Simple Minds in Switzerland somewhere, and that was 80,000 people. But then we came back home to England, and it was the first proper show, big set. And we were headlining Crystal Palace Bowl, 20,000 people. And that really freaked me out. And because we'd not been in the country either. Yeah. I remember the sound check was the day before, because it's open air venue. And I remember driving down and seeing these enormous posters everywhere with my face on, and the merch stand with my face on a T-shirt. And I thought, oh my God, you know, why did I say I could do this? You know, I was really scary. I really did. It was really scary, that gig. And I remember I played a duff note in one of the solos the first solo I played, and I was a real guitar feature when I was in the band. I mean, I had a solo in virtually every number, and it was being recorded by Radio 1 for broadcast on Christmas Day, like no pressure. And I remember thinking, oh God. And then I spent the rest of the gig trying to forgive myself for that one note. And I remember the following week calling the BBC saying, look, can I patch up that one note? And the bloke said, I don't know what you're talking about. I said, no, please, mate. He said, look, I'll tell you what, I'm going to send you a rough of that one track. And of course, I can't hear it.
You can't hear it.
And it's amidst everything else. And of course, in my head, it's, you know, it's the one that it's louder than everything else. And there's a big neon arrow saying, get this idiot.
So what was it then? Was it just, did it feel like the Level 42 sort of naturally reached a point where you wanted to go and do something else? Or was it just they weren't touring much anymore?
Mark decided he didn't want to do it anymore. So the final gig was at the Albert Hall in '94.
Right, and then he took it. Because I think I mentioned obviously Nathan, Mark's brother, who's the current guitar player for Level 42, does some videos with us. So that was, I guess they just took a hiatus and he just took some time out.
Yeah, well, the first thing he did was he toured as himself.
Right.
Level 42's Mark King, and I did one of those tours.
Right.
With Gary. So it was like 3/4 of what was, you know, Level 42. And then he eventually bought the name back, and has been touring with him ever since with Nathan, who I work with.
I mean, I always think, you know, you think of Level 42 and you think of driving bass lines and big synthy parts to it like that, and then I could, you know, you could be forgiven to go, oh, they had a guitar player, did they, like that? Yeah. And then you see what Nathan has to play in those songs, and it's like, bloody hell, you know, it's like some seriously complex stuff.
Yeah, well, Mark has got this extraordinary facility. I mean, I've been very fortunate. I've worked with some of the most amazing musicians in the world, but there's something about Mark. Mark is probably the most naturally gifted. It's like he doesn't need to doesn't practice, doesn't need to, you know. And there's one song we used to do, it's a thing called To Be With You Again, and it's quite a complicated bass part. It's all over the shop, and I have to double it an octave up. And there are moments where the lead vocal is split. So whenever Mike's singing, Mike would come over for a chat, and I'm thinking, I can barely play this as it is. Have a chat, and he's just.
That's great stories. So when that did you have a plan for when that was going to?
No, none of it's been a plan. It's all been a complete fluke and a complete accident. Panic, largely, is what's driven any career. After that, I did an album. Well, we started making an album and it ended up just being an EP with 3 guys that were in a band called Japan. So Steve Jansen and Mick Kahn and Richard Barbieri. And I did quite a few things with them. There was another album that Steve and Mick produced that I played on. And we were touring with this Italian woman called Alice. And that led on to working with some other Italian acts. Just, you know, and then you get into areas where you just have to try and earn a living, you know, because that's what you do. And I've done everything from. I did a lot of TV ads at one point. I did music for big corporate events, which is composing it to picture. I did music for a number of TV series.
Did it feel like, you know, there was? I do think, you know, I meet a lot of guitar players that you know are very aware of the fact that, you know, that they've got to have several strings to their bow to sort of, you know, commercially make a living.
Yeah, to survive, absolutely.
And I don't ever really see anything as less authentic than, you know, at the end of the day, if you're making some music and you're being paid to make it, then you're a professional musician. The end. But was there a sense, you know, did you go through a period of thinking, oh, I really miss the adulation maybe, or of being part of?
No, I think what I meant. I mean, I did miss playing live, although I still was doing bits of it. I think what you miss is the control, you know.
Control of your life, or
control of your life, control of what you're doing creatively. I mean, you know, I realise that's an incredibly privileged place to be, but I did have a lot of that, and so that's tough, you know, because you're trying to imbue whatever it is that you do with a sense of yourself and a sense of your kind of, you know, your musical DNA, but obviously you're working for clients, and you have to take on board all sorts of preposterous comments, and I used to think that there were a lot of idiots working in the music industry until I worked for the advertising industry. And I mean, I've got a million anecdotes where, I mean, they're just jaw-dropping. And the amount of money wasted, you know, bullshit that people talk, you know, things they don't really know what they're talking about at all, that you kind of have to swallow and go, oh yeah, okay, you know. I'm loving the idea that someone has sort of, I don't know, got an advert for a sausage roll or something like that, and you've got to do a piece of music for it, and the ad director's telling you that you haven't quite got the essence of the pastry or something. Come on, there's got to be a good one. Here's an anecdote. You might have to edit this because it's really long, but it's an example of the preposterous nature of it. I get a call to do a version of a song called "I'm a Man," which was a hit for the Spencer Davis Group in the 60s.
Right.
And they're using it for a Volkswagen commercial. The idea of the commercial is that this lovely new Volkswagen is being driven along, and there's a little Jack Russell, and he's sat in the passenger seat, and he's really happy. And when he's not in the car, he's really unhappy and nervous. That's, in essence, that's the
ad. Yeah, got it.
The thing is, it's the dog that's singing "I'm a Man," right?
Right.
So I spend an afternoon recreating as authentically as I can something that sounds like Spencer Davis's version. And everyone says, fantastic. And I'm thinking, brilliant, that's the easiest money I've ever earned. I then get a call saying, we need to choose a singer because, you know, we're not sure what we think the dog's voice would sound like. Okay.
So you'd sung this, had you? And you just weren't Jack Russell-y enough?
I wasn't even thinking at that point. I was just creating the track. So then they said, could you suggest some singers? And I said, okay. She said, we'd quite like, obviously someone that's good and can belt it out, but actually someone who's not a very good singer might be good too, like somebody that sings in a shower. So, okay. So then I spent a day or two kind of contacting people and getting them to send me demos, which I then sent off to the advertising agency. And then they came back with a shortlist. We then spent a day in the studio, a long day. And it was a studio crammed full of, the director, the animator, the producer, the creative.
Was the Jack Russell in there as well?
No.
Did he get final say? Or
no, the Jack Russell hadn't even been cast at that point. And we record all these different people, and I get them to, and I'm directing them, and they sing it full out, and then they have to do a version where they're all nervous. And at the end of the day, they're chuffed. They said, oh, it's amazing. We're going to be hard pushed to select somebody that's so good. And the next day they phoned me and said, we've decided we'd like to use Lyndon, who's an old mate of mine. Mm-hmm. So I was thrilled, phoned him up. And she said, right, we're back in 10 days' time. We're going to film this ad in California with the dog. You can't get that kind of acting talent in England. So they had the Jack Russell they'd already primed for the role.
Hollywood. Jack Russell, yeah.
And then she said, we need to have one more studio day because on the end of that week, we're booked in at Frame Store, which is, they'd just won an Oscar, I think, for the C.S. Lewis film. So they do all the green screen and all the elaborate things. So that was going to make the dog sing this song. The day before, I get a phone call. They've come back and they've said, Jack, yes, we've just had a meeting with the head creative, Jeremy. Man I'd never met. Yeah. Yes, he's not sure about any of those voices, so we've got a new brief. Okay. She said, yes, we'd like a young black singer between the ages of 17 and 21. Something really specific.
Yeah.
And of course, the obvious and innate response, which is, I could play you singers that were older and a different colour, and you wouldn't know who they were.
Yeah.
You don't say that. You go, okay.
Yeah.
And actually, somebody at the meeting said, is there any chance we could find someone who sings in a regional accent? Yeah, all right.
What region are we?
Well, anything, I think.
Oh, I see. Does anything?
Yeah, Geordie or whatever. I said, all right. And I said, right, and then what are we going to do? She said, well, can you get us little demos like before and we'll select? I said, okay. And when are we doing this? So we're still doing it tomorrow. I said, tomorrow? How can we? Why? She said, well, with Frame Store so expensive, we can't not go in on the Friday. So then, at the time, I had a studio in Acton, and it was round the corner from those. There was like drum tech, guitar tech, vocal tech, and I went in there, and they gave me some people. And then all night, I'm talking to these young kids who don't know who Stevie Winwood is, and never heard of it, and they don't know the song, they haven't got the lyrics. And eventually, at about 3, we get a call saying, right, these are who's going to be there. So the next day, we do the same thing, except now there's a guy from Frame Store with a camera trying to capture the mouth movements of the singer.
Oh, I see, right.
And these young kids who've not been in a proper studio before, absolutely cacking themselves. We go through the whole thing, and then it's all brilliant. We don't know who to choose. Next day, I'll get another phone call saying, yes, we've just had another meeting. We doesn't like any of those voices either. So we've had to cancel Frame Store, which would have cost them tens of thousands of pounds, right? And I said, what happens now? I said, well, we've got these 2 guys who are kind of well-known voiceover guys who also sing. They're going to do it on Monday. And I said, right. So we'll do different versions with them and choose one of those. And I said, and then they'll sing it. No, we can't afford them. We've just we've agreed for them to do it as a demo fee. I said, what does that mean? He said, well, we'll pick the one that we like, and then we'll ask you to find someone that could do an imitation of the one that we like. I'm thinking, this is nuts. So I spend a day with these 2 guys, very nice guys. Next day, get a phone call. Yes. Yeah, listen, we played everything back today, and we've decided we'd like to go for Lyndon. This was the guy that got the gig in the first place. So then I phone him up, and he's gone from down, back to up, back to down, he's up again. And so we arranged to do that. Literally 3 hours later, I get a phone call saying, oh, Jack, do you remember this guy called Charlie? Charlie? No? Yes, he was at the very first... I said, I don't remember him. The guy with the hat? I said, oh, he was a friend of one of the creatives. It wasn't one of the guys I brought. Yeah. Have you got all the takes of him? I went, yeah, why? Well, we've decided it doesn't really matter who's singing. It all looks funny coming out of the dog. And that's who they used.
Amazing. And is it at this point that you sort of went, I need to get back into a band?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. You know, there comes a point. I was talking to Gavin about this. You know, you're on some incredibly well-paid tour, that goes on for months, and you hate the music. And he said at some point there comes a point where you think, you know what, I'll give you all the money back if I can just go home. So there is an element of that, and I guess what I was doing at the time was I was trying to utilise that to fund making my own record.
Right.
It was still, so I made another solo record, and of course I had all of these amazing players on it, and that's kind of how, it was one of the reasons why I ended up where I am now.
So
Talking to you.
Yeah. When was are we up to a sort of a point chronologically where we can go, you got the call? Or it feels a bit like we've sort of fast forwarded a bit.
Here's the interesting thing. The interesting thing is, one of the jobs I did in order to try and maintain a living was, as I said to you earlier, was composing music for these big corporate events. And these things are enormous. It was a whole world I didn't even know existed. I remember we used to do 2 or 3 events a year for Hewlett Packard, and you'd go to a conference centre in Amsterdam, and there'd be like 2,000 people, and this big kind of filmic thing that they'd done, and I'd composed the music to picture, and it would all be in surround. And so I'd got a surround system, and I learned how to work it. So the first thing was, there was this band called the Schizoid Band, which was comprised of lots of people who'd been in Crimson, playing older Crimson music, and they needed someone to play guitar and sing, and I'd got to know Pete Sinfield, who was the other name on that list of songwriters that I told you about, and he recommended me, and we ended up doing this tour. And at the beginning of the tour, when we were first rehearsing, I got a phone call one day from Robert Fripp, I'd never spoken to. He was this childhood hero of mine, and he said, "Hello, it's Robert Fripp here, Jack. I was just wondering how rehearsals are going." I said, "You want the honest answer?" He said, "Yes, please." I said, "It's a nightmare. It's 3 of the most unpleasant weeks I've spent in the music industry." And he said, "Yes, I thought that might be the case." And we kind of bonded. So that's how I got to know him.
Right.
And then after that finished, I asked him to play on my solo record. And then the original drummer left the Schizoid Band, and the replacement was a guy called Ian Wallace, who was lovely, who'd originally replaced him in Crimson back in the early 70s. He died, and I sang at his funeral.
Okay.
And I sang a song called Islands, which is a King Crimson song, and Robert was there. And then Robert invited me to his house for lunch, and we had this long chat about music, etc. And then eventually he phoned me up once and said, "Would you like to come down and spend a day recording and improvising?" So I did. I went down to his studio down there in Wiltshire, and he had his whole rig where he does, Robert does this whole soundscapey thing. It wasn't all that, but it was a lot of that, and me playing, and we did this whole day. And at the end of the day, he gave me a hard drive. I said, "What's that?" He said, "That's what we did today." I said, "Right, but why are you giving it to me?" "Oh, I'm sure you'll think of something." And that eventually became this album called A Scarcity of Miracles, where I kind of wrote songs on top of it. And we eventually replaced my bass playing with Tony Levin and the fake drums with Gavin Harrison, and we got Mel Collins in. And it came out as a King Crimson project. So that's kind of where, because all those guys are in this current version of the band.
You must be pinching yourself all the way through this, aren't you?
Well,
you're not pinching yourself, but as in just thinking...
It is. No, it's extraordinary. It is extraordinary, because it was the reason I became a musician.
Yeah.
So to come, and I think you do get to a point where you get burnt out, you get bored, or you get frustrated, and you do hanker back to that time. Why did I get into this in the first place? What was it about this? And then to actually find yourself actually in that very place. And then the next thing that happened was I sang lead vocals on a Steve Hackett album. He re-recorded a lot of Genesis classics, and I did some live things with him as a guest. And Robert got to hear about that, and he thought, "Oh, that's a good idea. Someone should be doing a kind of Crimson thing where they're playing this older material." So then he tried to put a band together that he wasn't in.
Yeah.
And that was Mel Collins, Gavin Harrison, John Wetton,
right,
and myself. And I think we had a couple of rehearsals, and at one point Robert thought,
And this was to be billed as King Crimson?
No, it was going to be called Crimson DNA, I think.
Okay.
And then Robert thought, actually, and then we got a phone call.
So how old's Robert now?
He'll be 73 this year, as will Tony.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Tony looks good for his age, doesn't he?
Yeah. Yeah, to be fair, Tony's had that look for some time.
Yeah,
It's a look that's easy to maintain.
I met him at, there wasn't this NAMM show, but the NAMM show before.
He's a fantastic bloke, actually, Tony.
Yeah,
Really
he's in
great guy.
great shape. Fair enough.
Yeah.
So how do you think, is King Crimson just, is there just a new generation of fans every time there's some, a new tour or a new album or whatever, or is the fan base just getting older and older?
No, I think in England, I think the fan base reflects the cliche. I think.
Right.
But when we go to other territories, I'm constantly amazed at the age range. We did a lot of shows in Italy last year. We did 2 nights at the ancient amphitheatre in Pompeii, and you look out and it's all ages, and there's a lot of women, and much to my utter amazement. And I think there are many things as musicians of our age that are frightening and a nightmare about the internet. But I think one of the positive things is it kind of blurs everything. I would never have liked the music my father liked, even if I'd liked it, right? Because it was part of a it was part of a kind of generational thing, and whereas my son here, he likes he's not tribal about it.
Yeah.
And he will openly say, his favourite groups are Everything, and the Beatles, right?
Yeah.
So there's no kind of, it doesn't matter that that's 50 years old. It's all music, and we've definitely seen that. And this version of the band, possibly because we do the older material as well as the newer material, has been very popular, and with the audiences we play in front of are bigger and bigger.
And I'm going to come around to, we'll do a little gear thing, but so how much more, is the King Crimson thing just sort of all the time people are buying tickets, the band's going to keep doing, or are you doing a specific leg at the moment?
This year is the anniversary year,
right.
So there's lots of stuff happening. We're doing 50 shows, we're doing big festivals, and they're normal, they're festivals with kind of acts that I recognise as being contemporary. And we're quite often top of the bill of some of those. We're doing Rockin' in Rio, which is I think we're second on the bill one night to Muse. And that's like 200,000.
I was going to say it's going to be huge.
Yeah, it's ridiculous.
It?
Yeah, we'll
no
clear,
health and safety.
We'll clear the beach. Don't you worry about that. And we're playing places like in LA. We're playing the Greek, which is 5,000 or 6,000. We're playing Radio City Music Hall. We're doing 3 nights at the Albert Hall in England. We're doing some more of those amphitheatres. We're doing one in Verona, which I think is about 8,000. It's extraordinary. There's a brilliant Bill Bruford line that I'm fond of quoting, which is King Crimson, the only band where you can regularly play in 15/8 and still stay in nice hotels. So it amazes me that you can play music that's that challenging at times, and yet it still has that kind of reach and that kind of commercial value. It's extraordinary.
That's superb. So we're going to do a gear nerd out here. Obviously, have you always been into? Well, actually, no. You said that early stuff. It was just guitar and amp. But I think we are going really early there.
Yeah, I think. I went through phases. I think when I first started, because I was into Robert, I was trying to recreate that whole kind of fuzz tone thing, and then I went. I became very purist about it, and that was partly hanging out with Alan Holdsworth, because I thought, how does he get that sound? Well, turns out it's his head and his fingers, but he was just using an amp, overdriving an amp, and I thought, man, that's So for years I did that. You
have racks of flashing lights all through the 80s.
I had quite a big rack when I was with Level 42. But that's because that was the only way to do it then. Yeah. So you'd have like a kind of, a racked mixer, and you'd be sending to the effects. So you'd have effects, and I had a MIDI controller on the floor which would change, in essence, basically 3 sounds. You'd have a clean sound, a chunky sound, and then a lead sound, and then it would be combinations of that and whatever the effects were available via MIDI.
Presumably that was still very much ending up though plugged into a guitar amplifier.
Ultimately. I'm trying to remember what I used. There was a company that built, isn't that awful? I can't even remember their name now. That built me the valve amps. They were really good.
Oh,
as well.
right.
Rock something. Isn't that awful? I can't. They don't exist anymore.
Right.
So.
Okay.
And then I actually used Trace Elliott on one tour. Their guitar amps.
Yeah.
And they had a whole kind of valve thing, with that looked like an old tape recorder, with the thing.
They got the meters
the little
thing,
meter
haven't they? Well, that's
thing,
that was their, of course, presumably through the Mark's
Through
connection,
Mark's,
because they built a lot of stuff
Yeah.
for him, didn't they? Yes.
Yeah, and then the irony was, when level, I had a little studio at home in a separate building, but when Level 42 finished, I had nowhere to put this equipment. I couldn't move it.
Right.
It's an enormous rack which wouldn't go through the door of my studio, and these big cabs, and I couldn't get it in the car, so it was kind of it was one of those things. It was only suitable for playing venues of that size when you had a road crew and a place to store it.
Yeah.
And then over the years, you try anything. It's this guitarist's thing, isn't it?
But have you had a guitar you've always leaned towards?
I think I've always liked kind of older things, and I look back at some of the guitars I've had to sell because again, that's another familiar story amongst guitar players. The guitars you had to sell to pay the tax bill.
Yeah.
And now I can't buy them back because they cost. I had a white, again because of the Alan Holdsworth thing. I had this white SG Les Paul with the gold and the 3 pickups, and I recently saw one of those on the wall for about 15, 20 grand or something. I can't, And I had a beautiful 1951 single Alnico pickup 175, which I used on the first Arrhythmia record.
Right.
Can't afford to buy one of those now either. So, and I think I always had that. I was always drawn to that more than anything.
Yeah.
But I also used to like modern technology because I remember in Level 42, although I had all of those guitars, actually live I used the Steinberger because it just didn't go out of tune.
The cricket bat one? Or
Actually, no, I had one that
body?
looked a bit more like a Strat.
Yeah.
And the tremolo system was amazing, the trans trem. Did you ever...
Was that a Kahler thing, or was that
No,
actually
it's
their
its own
proprietary thing?
And I took ages to set up. But
Yeah.
once you set it up, it was like a pitch wheel.
Yeah.
So if you played a chord, it would go down in step.
Yeah.
Like a pitch wheel.
It's quite interesting because bit of a left turn bit. Steinberger, has been owned as a brand by Gibson for years and years and years.
Yeah.
And they've done nothing with it under the previous owner's range, right, other than make the cheapest copies that you can make. But that's ironically, that is a brand they are looking at the moment to go, maybe, because the headless thing's popular now with Kiesel and Strandberg and all that kind of thing. And they're sort of going, maybe, because that was the original. And I just remember again seeing those, the square with the neck kind of, I'm just going, oh God, who'd want to play one of those? But
well, that's my point. Yeah, it doesn't have the romance and it doesn't have all of that stuff that a beautiful old Gibson might have.
Yeah.
But as a piece of kit, they were quiet.
Yeah, all the AMG loaded or something, weren't they? Yeah.
Really reliable. It never went out of tune.
I think I do remember the trem system is almost like it's not surface mounted, is it? But it's sort of cut into a.
Yeah.
It's quite long that way, isn't it, from memory? But anyway. I think probably the ball, the fact there's no tuners at this end probably helps a lot with
there's no
tuning.
string stretching or anything.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
And then I did use when I started touring with Mark King after Level 42. It's a very un-rock and roll reason for getting this guitar, but I did get a Parker Fly,
right?
Because I'd done my back in. And he weighed about 3 or 4 pounds.
Well, they were cool for a while.
No, I thought they were great.
Well, yeah.
Again, I never liked the look of them, but they sounded amazing, played beautifully. The neck was amazing.
It's funny you say that. The going from the Steinberger to the Parker as well. The other guy that I remember being slightly synonymous with the Steinberger thing, who did then do the Parker thing, was Reeves Gabrels.
Yes, that's right.
And they'd have that, but it sort of fitted that look, didn't it? Or fitted
futuristic
that,
kind of thing. Yeah.
So let's roll on to sort of modern day then.
Yeah.
And you've got this. So were you playing PRS before they approached you to do the Crimson?
Yeah, I just started playing a PRS, and then the Crimson thing came up, and I mentioned that to them, and they said, "Oh, it'd be lovely to do something special for you." So that's when they said, "What? Anything you fancy?" And I said, well, it'd be great if we could use the iconic artwork.
It is iconic.
Yeah, I mean, as I say, I should have brought it with me because the original is different. It's kind of lighter and it goes to blue. And a friend of mine who's an album sleeve designer had to create these transfers because obviously on a gatefold sleeve, let's do it this way. Obviously, the image is the wrong way round because you want the bulk of the image there.
Yeah.
But of course, on a gatefold sleeve, it's on the other side. So he did this amazing thing of lifting it all up and turning it round, and to create that image. Yeah, and then I've got a pizza in the bridge because there's quite a lot of the old Crimson stuff's got acoustic guitar in it, so it's
I know we mentioned right at the beginning that you've changed the pickups on there, and I think it's the face that's throwing me off here. But have you put the volume and the tone control in a different place to how they normally are on these guitars, or is that just me?
No, I think it is. It does look. The face is in a different place to my one.
Right.
We moved it and we made it bigger.
Right.
We repositioned it. So if you've seen pictures of me playing my own personal one, that's
very cool. So then, amp-wise, or not amp-wise, as the case may be.
Well, yeah, I mean, obviously it's a technical challenge. This idea of Robert's, that we all thought was nuts when he first said it. And he said he'd had this vision in his head of 3 drummers down the front. I thought, what, 3? Really? And I remember when we walked into we were rehearsing at Elstree, the film studio. And I remember walking in, because up until then we were in a room and we were all kind of facing each other. And the first time we saw it set up as it would be on stage, I mean, it looked amazing.
Right.
It did look amazing. That alone looked kind of incredible. And the other thing that I thought was very clever that didn't dawn on me until we'd started rehearsing in that configuration is it turns the concept of a kind of rock band on its head in that, the lead singer is down the front and everybody else is supporting him. And actually putting the drums down the front means suddenly it's like a mini orchestra. It's much more kind of egalitarian. And your eye is drawn to whoever's taking centre stage figuratively at that point. Yeah. Which I'm sure was part of Robert's idea, but it didn't strike any of us until we actually saw it. But the technical challenge of that, of course, is that, Tony Levin, Robert and myself are on a riser at the back, and if we had cabs, the first thing those cabs would hit is 3 sets of overheads.
Right.
So it's impossible.
Right.
So we're all using in-ears, and we've all got our own little monitor mixer.
Yeah.
And Robert is using the Fractal.
Yeah.
And he's got a laptop open all the time, so he's tweaking it in detail. I mean, Robert's rig is so scary looking. He's got about 7 or 8 pedals. Because he's got like a MIDI pickup as well on his system, and he's running everything through these eventides, and so he does all the, he creates these soundscapes at the beginning of the show. So his rig looks ridiculous. And frankly, I wanted something as simple as possible because, playing the notes is hard enough without. So originally I used a Kemper because Tony's using, I think he uses 2 or 3 Kempers because he's profiled a lot of his Ampeg bass rigs, but he plays a stick. Yes. So I think he's got the top end of the stick going through another Kemper. Yeah. And that's all in in-ear monitoring. And I was using the Kemper to start with, which is great. I've got nothing against the Kemper. In fact, I spent a day in the studio with a load of amps profiling them up. Have you done that? Have you done the profiling thing?
Yeah. It's freaky, isn't it?
Isn't it freaky? That bit at the end where there's the AB button and you're listening to the original amp or their version of it, and you're going, whoa, it's like voodoo. I don't know how that works.
Yeah. Especially as it's only 90 seconds, isn't it? 90 seconds of a thing going.
That's right, yeah. It's like Doctor Who, isn't it?
Like, how does this even work? But yeah, it's spooky.
What did he say?
It's like I'm having sex, I think, is what came out of the control room.
Speak for yourself, mate. And the problem was I was using, because I was using it with the piezo, that was going straight into a DI. Yeah. And I've got a switch on the guitar, so I can switch it on and off there. but I can't be relied upon to do that. So I had a switch on the floor. Turns out I can't be relied upon to do that either. So I'd quite often forget to either turn it on or turn it off. And I was using, when I first got the Kemper, they didn't have a foot controller. So I was using a Pod HD or whatever it was.
Just as a MIDI
Just as a
controller,
exactly.
yeah.
And then one of them went completely haywire when we were in Japan. This is 3 or 4 years ago when we were in Japan before the most recent time. And it was one of those things where I'm trying to hit that sound there, 5D, and it's going, no, I'm playing this one here. No, and it just kept going back. So and when I got back to England, I phoned up the guy that I knew at Line 6, and there was no reply. The phone was dead, and eventually said, oh no, they've been bought by Yamaha.
Yeah.
So I went up to see them, and they were very nice, and they just gave me a replacement, and they said, you should have a look at this too, you know. And it was great. You've used them, you know, it's so easy to program. I mean, the whole effects side of it is so easy and so quick. And that whole business of just moving the order in which they appear, which, you know, no disrespect to the Kemper, but the whole effects aspect of it is really fiddly. So that appealed to me. And ultimately, this has got 2 inputs. Yeah. So, and you can treat them completely separately, but save them as a patch. Yep. So I was able to, you know, the sounds where I require the piezo, I can tweak it, I can put compression on it or whatever, and end up with this great patch and save it as that. So
tell the guys the story about the patch I think you said you were using on the Kemper.
Oh well, yeah, because we started doing a lot of early Crimson stuff, and that material had never been played with 2 guitar players. So it meant that I think this is one tune in particular called Sailor's Tale off of Violence, where Robert does these great overdubs, and it's Robert's sound, and it's these 2 guitars. It sounds amazing. So suddenly I'm in a position to be able to provide that, and we were rehearsing, and at the end of it, Rob said, "Oh, that sounded fantastic. Sounded very authentic. What sound are you using there?" And I said, "It's a preset I found on the Kemper called Early Fripp."
It's perfect.
Yeah,
he probably wrote it. But do you? I mean, is there? You know, if there was going to be another Jakko solo album, or maybe I don't know, you were doing some stuff in the studio with Crimson, would you think you'd go back to something different to this, or are you kind of sold on this now as an idea, as a solution?
I tell you what the trouble is. I mean, I think ultimately, I like, you know, you want to try out. It's like if you go into if you've got the time and you want to try which one sounds best on this. But this is so convenient. You just plug it in. You know, that's the trouble. Yeah. But I've been using a few things. I really like the MT15. You know, the little
PRS Mark Tremonti thing.
Yeah, it sounds great. You turn it up.
It does sound good.
I was really impressed with it. So, you know, I'd quite like to. Plus, it's that thing of being in the control room with the amp out the thing and being able to tweak and. Yeah. So I'd like to do a bit of that. I mean, I'm trying to make a solo record at the minute. So,
cool.
So that's obviously in my mind currently.
So if people have listened to this and think, you know, I must go and listen to some more of this man's work. Is it what's the best website for them to sort of dive on over to? And I'll stick it in the description below.
Well, you can. My last solo record, which you know I'm pretty proud of, is called The Bruised Romantic Glee Club, and that's available through a company called BurningShed.com, who sells. They sell all sorts of stuff. And you can get everything there. I think the most recent Dysrhythmia record, which we did a couple of years ago, is on there.
Cool. So none of this stuff would be available on Apple Music or anything like that. You've got to go to the Burning Shed. Good for you.
Yeah.
We had a long conversation. This is what we talked about predominantly over. Should we finish on that? Do you want to get all political? Come on, let's do this.
It's difficult. You know, I know people that justify the machinations of Spotify, but I got involved in a court case. I mean, I just supplied some information that was proving that they had a kind of modus operandi, a way that they worked, and my godson, I think it was, said, "Oh, it's great. All your solo records are on Spotify." I went, "What's Spotify?" And he told me. I said, "No, they haven't got that." He said, "They have." He sent me this link, and all these albums of mine were on there. So I wrote to them and said, "Can you take these down? Because I own these. You don't. I've not given you any permission. Yeah. There's been no correspondence. So if you are selling them or whatever, or playing them or streaming them, I'm not. No one's giving me any kind of information." And nothing happened. And then eventually I spoke to somebody I knew at MCPS, and he gave me a phone number. And they said, "Oh, yeah, okay, well, you're going to have to fill in a form." So what form? "We need a form for you. You need to prove that you own this stuff." Wait a minute. You've illegally sampled my stuff and put it up there, and yet I have to prove that. And again, I filled that all in and nothing happened. Years went by, and it was only when I got involved with Crimson and I mentioned it, they went straight in, got it all taken down. And I know Crimson are putting stuff up there now, but I know originally they put all their albums up and had to get them taken down, and then 18 months later they were all back up there again. So there was that aspect of it, which of course, is abusive, and I don't like that. And then you get into the payment, There was, I don't know did you see that tweet? Peter Frampton Comes Alive, one track off that, which was the biggest selling live album of all time, I think. And he printed a royalty statement from Spotify for $1,000, I think it was, for 55.5 million streams.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to plug there's one Andertons track which you can use on all the popular streaming sites, which was a cover of a Maxi Priest song called "Wanna Get Close to You," which it's had 100,000 streams. And we got our first royalty check the other day as well, and I shall spend that $24 very wisely.
$24.
Yes,
I know.
So it's. I don't know. What do you do?
Well, I know I think one of the arguments is, well, it drives people. You get the whole it's the playlist thing, isn't it? Where you see someone deferring to the 16-year-old.
Yeah, what do they call it? Discovery, isn't it? That's the sort of idea is that people will discover you somehow and then buy something.
And you think, okay. And then there's also but there's an element of truth, I guess, in that the PRS payment for one play on Radio 1. Mm-hmm. Would be, I don't know what it is now, but it would be like 30 odd quid or something. Mm-hmm. And then you multiply that by, if you're on the A list and you're getting 20 to 30 plays a week, and then all the other subsequent stations, that's a vast amount of money. And I guess the Spotify argument is somebody streams it as one person.
It still needs hundreds of millions of views to stack up to any
and I think I'm just slightly suspicious because the guys that started that, started their career illegally doing stuff, and when Spotify started, they were still doing that.
Well, fair enough.
Allegedly,
and the views expressed on this channel
are not necessarily indicative
of Andertons. I think that's the bit that I have to get in there somewhere. But I'm sure there'll be a lot of people nodding in and sharing your views on that one. But I can't remember where we got round to that. That's right. So Burning Shed is where you can find out about your music.
Yeah, and it sells all the Crimson stuff there too, and lots of other stuff.
And do we know and the Albert Hall dates? Didn't you say you got 3?
Yeah, we're 3 nights at the Albert Hall.
Any tickets left for those?
They are. I don't know.
Not sure.
I think it's the 17th, 18th, and 19th. Although it might be the 18th, 19th of June.
Of June. Well, there we go. Well, we'll find links to all that stuff.
Yeah.
Including links to this guitar and the Helix and all stuff. But look, it's been a pleasure, man. I've got a feeling this could have gone on. If I'd have probed more of the stories and stuff like that, this could have been a 10-part documentary. But perhaps we should get you on again, maybe after the shows, and we can talk a bit about how that went. But it's been a pleasure.
Mutual. Thank you.
And good luck with everything. And I hope you guys have enjoyed this as much as I have. But thank you very much for coming in.
Thank you.
Enjoy listening to Jakko play on a track. What's the track called that you're going to?
Hasn't got a title.
Hasn't got. It's a work in progress, is it?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, enjoy this. Yes, like and subscribe, and do come back soon. And thank you very much for watching. See you soon.